Somalia is set to receive full debt relief from the International Monetary Fund and other bilateral and multilateral lenders by the end of the year 2023, according to a statement by IMF. Now, the country's reforms aims at boosting revenue collection and fiscal transparency, which have begun to bear fruit, making it eligible for full debt relief. Consequently, Somalia's debt will be reduced to $557 million, which is about 10% of its gross domestic product. The Horn of Africa nation reached the decision point under the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative in March 2020. It will help the country make lasting changes for its people by allowing its debt to be irrevocably reduced from $5.2 billion to about $3.7 billion. The IMF Executive Board approved a new 3-year, $395 million financing arrangement for Somalia under its Extended Credit Facility and Extended Fund Facility. However, it could not access full debt relief until it showed commitment to restructuring reforms that would ensure public resources are used effectively and benefit all Somali people. This morning, joining us to discuss this development is Aly Khan Satchu, Africa Geo-economist and macro analyst. He's also the CEO of Reach Management. It's nice to have you join us again, Aly Khan, on the show.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Now, this is something that Somalia has been yearning for quite a while now, and the IMF has played a huge role in the negotiation and the eventual facilitation of this particular relief. Now, what were the criteria that the IMF considered for Somalia's qualification?
I think, the IMF wanted to see a robust forward reform program, better tax collection, a greater degree of transparency around the fiscus. And I think the president and his team have persuaded the IMF that they can deliver on those promises. This was widely telegraphed. We were aware that this negotiation had been going on for quite some time. And I think this is a very positive outcome, because, as you know, once the IMF gives its seal of approval, once the debt is recalibrated to a more sustainable basis, that should allow other capital, other multilaterals, other bilaterals to come to Somalia's aid. And I think that's a very positive outcome that this president has achieved. It's a singular achievement under his second administration.
So was Somalia, being under the heavily indebted poor countries, a major decider for the qualification too?
Yes, I mean, as you said in your opening, about $5.2 billion of debt. Clearly, this was non-performing. It was a drag on Somalia, could not basically receive any new fresh funding. So they fall under the criteria of the Highly Indebted Countries Program. They've had that debt reduced substantially. I think it's infinitely more sustainable, and the path to a more sustainable future is ahead of them. So very, very positive outcome for Somalia.
Yeah, talking about debt reduction, we're looking at a reduction from $5.2 billion to about $3.7 billion. That's about just $1.5 billion. Now, some people are saying that deficit, or the gap in between, is quite insignificant and it will not have any impact whatsoever. But then I'd like to know what you think about that.
That's an interesting point. The challenge here is actually because they were not performing, they weren't having to pay any interest, or they weren't paying any interest on that $5.2 billion number. Now, under this program, they're going to have to service the lower debt, which is $3.6 billion or thereabouts. So from a cash flow perspective, actually, it puts them in a worse position because they've got to service that debt. However, the benefit of this reformatting and the benefit of this program is it allows Somalia's supporters, of which there are plenty, to come in and support them going forward, and basically assist them in servicing the reduced debt. But you are quite correct. It's not about the insignificance of the mainline figure. The real challenge for Somalia is the fact that they're worse off because they've got to service the debt now that it's been recalibrated.
All right, so we are actually aware that there's meant to be a full debt relief that will reduce Somalia's debt to about 557 million US dollars. That's about 10% of its GDP. But then we are wondering, how soon do you think this process will be completed? Because it has dragged on for long. We are thankful that it has gotten to this point. But then how soon do you think this will be finally put to bed?
No, I think we're a long way away from that. I think that's the silver bullet, obviously, for completely right-sizing the balance sheet. But my expectations are that that's, some years away. I think, they've got to this point, which is a significant step forward. And I think for the foreseeable future, they're going to have to deal with the situation as it is now, and as you described it in your opening remarks. Of course, to get it down to less than $1 billion to 10% of GDP is a panacea, but I don't think we're close to that yet. This is also a singular achievement by the multilaterals and the IMF in particular. As you know, the IMF is having significant challenges in places like Zambia in herding all the debtors together and achieving an outcome which is considered just by all the lenders. So I think this is a feather in their cap. It is a step forward for Somalia, but to expect the debt to be cut to $550 million anytime soon, I think is looking at the world through rose-tinted spectacles.
All right, so I'm looking at this reprieve now. What are the critical steps you think Somalia can take in addressing the shocks affecting its economic growth and development? It is critical that we talk about that.
So yes, Somalia obviously has had major challenges. You've had the insurgency, the Al-Shabaab insurgency, which is still raging, although the government has taken a much more forthright and aggressive approach to beating that insurgency back. But as we all know, the Al-Shabaab is quite entrenched. So we've got that challenge, which remains outstanding and has not been resolved. We have what is, unfortunately for Africa and the Horn of Africa in particular, we have the weather challenge in the sense that, which we're experiencing this year again. The Horn of Africa has been at the sharp end of climate change, and this is affecting the Somali, the rainfall patterns, the livestock economy, which is so important, and other factors. So if you look at the economy as a whole, and you think about it, they've got very, very significant challenges. However, there's tremendous potential in Somalia. We know that there's a lot of oil and there's a lot of gas, for example, in a world where there is a pivot away from Russian supplies. Maybe Somalia gets a chance to pop its head above the radar in regard to oil and gas. But I think that will need further strides against the insurgency. So it's a challenging environment. There are cross-cutting challenges, but we should see Somalia move forward. I think expectations are that Somalia will try and put into place a better tax collection regime and also start to create the architecture of a proper state. It's been under pressure for a long time. If you can create those with the help of the IMF and the World Bank, you can start collecting a little bit of tax, get people used to paying taxes. I think you can see strides made, but it's not going to change overnight. There's a lot of potential there, but I don't think we can expect, the light to just switch on and Somalia to start to boom. But it's starting from a low base. There's a lot of potential. Last time I was in Mogadishu, I saw a lot of real estate development. There's a lot of money held by the diaspora outside the country. This is a very well-connected diaspora. So if if the environment changes, I think you could see a lot more money being crowded in.
All right, in as much as we express optimism about what is happening in Somalia now, we will not forget that there have been years of droughts in the country that is actually very debilitating to the food insecurity in that country. And of course, that's also slowing economic activities in the country. But then I'd like to know, with all these challenges that has to do with Somalia's economy, drought, food insecurity, do you think that it still has the capacity to get out of the woods?
Yes, I do. I think, this, what we're talking about is the first step forward. I mean, they could not access money. They could not really access significant funds prior to this. So this is one step forward, but we're talking about a 10-step process. We need to see investment go into the livestock sector, which is a very big part of their economy. We need to see assistance with climate change. We need to see better infrastructure. Somalia, I think, at one time produced the most bananas globally. So there's a lot of potential in the economy, but it needs to see investment and it needs to see security as well. And it needs to see its diaspora pump money into that economy. And therefore, I think, the next steps would be probably looking at the capital markets, looking at the stock market in order to put money to work in a more orderly and 21st century manner.
All right, you talked about livestock, which of course we can tie to the agriculture. And we are aware that the country has passed multiple laws to expand its tax-based system, even from those sectors of the economy to the telecom sector. Now, I'd like to know how viable you think the telecom sector can also contribute in terms of revenue to Somalia's economy.
The telecom sector has kept the Somali economy afloat through thick and thin because it's allowed mobile money, it's allowed remittances to come into the country. And actually, the telecom charges that Somalia telecom companies charge are the lowest in any African country. It's quite an incredible story. So I think there's plenty of potential for the telecom companies to play a much bigger role and assist the government in terms of tax collection, because so much of this economy is mobile money based today. So absolutely huge role to play, and probably the standout feature of this economy has really been the telecom sector.
All right, so we have Somalia's Paris club creditors, which include Italy, France, Russia, and of course the United States, and they're bound to have a meeting to decide on the debt relief to bring it to a fruition for Somalia. So what are your predictions from the outcome of the meeting that they will be having soon?
Yes, I expect them to coordinate and to conclude the matter in very short order. This is a relatively easy scenario. The amounts are not optically that big. And in an environment where it's proving difficult to resolve other countries' debt issues, this is an easy win and one they can all chalk up on the board. So I think politically, geo-economically, and geopolitically, this will move to a rapid conclusion. Because in a way, you've got this alignment between these countries. Russia might be an exception, but I think Russia too will look to play ball here. It's not complicated. You don't have Eurobond holders. You don't have a big Chinese lending book. This is something that the Paris Club used to be very good at. And I think here they're not going to be herding cats. So I expect a fast resolution.
All right, before I let you go, Aly Khan, we understand that there are other countries within the region where Somalia resides. We talk about Kenya, talk about Ethiopia, who are also going through their bout of socio-economic and political challenges. There's a bit of instability in those areas. Do you think that this sort of help coming from the creditors with the help of the IMF can escalate to them also? And how do you think they can also better position themselves so that they can benefit from this sort of loans to help them speed up the process of transformation for their own economy?
So I think firstly, a more stable and economically prosperous Somalia will have positive spillover effects for the East African community and for its neighboring countries like Ethiopia. Somalis are great traders and entrepreneurs, and if you can unleash them, I think it's going to be a positive influence across the region. I think you cited Kenya and Ethiopia. Both countries have debt challenges at the moment. Debt to GDP ratios have climbed, and both are looking to resolve them in slightly different ways. Ethiopia is looking to resolve it via the Paris Club, via the IMF, and via the programs that the IMF and the G7 introduced a couple of years ago during the COVID aftermath. So I think, look, it's going to be positive, but the challenges that Kenya and Ethiopia are facing are slightly different. They're bigger, and you have many more stakeholders involved. So it's positive. Somalia is a special case, but it could create positive spillover effects for other countries in the region in how they deal with their debt. But they're not considered highly indebted countries per se.
All right, so let's quickly just scale it down to the heavily indebted poor countries. We have Mauritania, we have Sudan, we have Rwanda, Sierra Leone, and all whatnot. So what hope do you think this can bring to them? Because they seem not to be at the position of advantage. But then how do you think these sort of helps can also be scaled down to them?
So I think it's a lot to do with our policymakers. It's a lot to do with the level of engagement our policymakers have with the multilaterals and the visibility and the political headwinds behind them. You know, it's going to be, we're living in a bit of a bifurcated world at the moment with the West on one side, Russia, China on the other. So where these highly indebted countries find themselves with all these stakeholders, it's a little bit more difficult. But if you've got a similar scenario to Somalia, I think this is the right time to seize the momentum and get these big multilaterals to look for these easy wins, because the highly indebted countries are not super complex, unlike other economies in Africa where you have multiple stakeholders who are holding your debt.
All right. Thank you so much, Aly Khan, for dropping by and for, of course, lending your voice to this discourse. Appreciate.